welcome to Old Scary World. Today we're just going to be going through some random images that I found on the internet. These photos don't necessarily fit a congruent city or country or even a specific time per se. More just images that I found recently that I find particularly interesting. So we'll just be going through those, zooming in, zooming out, examining, kind of just picking apart some of these random images. Here we start with one from Scotland. We see this woman here standing, just kind of contemplating everything. But what I find particularly interesting is this archway here and how it's almost like a portal into a different realm. And then we see the facading here doesn't quite match up, and we see her just kind of staring off into nothing, and we see kind of an amalgamation of just all kinds of different time periods here, just kind of slathered on and slapped together. You know, obviously her clothes are of the period of the late 1800s, and this box here and all that kind of stuff. And then we just kind of see possibly centuries of add-ons here and just the decay and all that. And then but this here, this particular kind of design here is very reminiscent of something more medieval, for lack of a better term. Possibly like even like from a little bit later, like in the Renaissance, like 1400s. You know, and we just think about how many people have walked up and down this road here, and then you start to really kind of understand and get a deeper appreciation of these photographs, is because you can imagine, you can kind of use your imagination to fill in the gaps, and you can kind of imagine all the different types of people and all the different types of cultures that walk this road over the centuries, possibly even millennia. And then here we have an interior shot of one of the World's Fair expositions. So when people talk about the World's Fairs and how they were just these paper mache buildings and that they were made out of plywood and cardboard or some such nonsense, is they say, oh, the interiors weren't like that. The interiors weren't nice. But here we see that the interiors were nice. We see that the interiors looked almost the same as the exterior, as far as sculptures and statues and over the top details, and you know, just all this kind of frill, all this grandiose extra. And I believe this was Paris. I believe this is at the Paris exposition. So once again, you know, people want to speculate that the insides of the World's Fairs buildings were mundane and minimalist and all that kind of stuff. And maybe in certain situations that would be correct, but not in this situation. And I do believe this building was permanent. I forget the name of this, what it was in the World's Fair, but regardless, we see a depiction of, I guess that would be Saint Michael slaying the dragon, which is, you know, very interesting when you get into the bloodlines of Europe and what the dragon, you know, represented and the families and so on and so forth. But nonetheless, you see it here depicted in Paris, France. And so, yeah, there's that, which is very interesting. And also, we see here these wild horses being bridled by, I can't tell, it looks like a female figure here, and she's got the reins in her hands. And then just these grand stairwells and the domes and the arches and just every hallmark that you would expect of the old world tradition. So we'll go to the next image now. And here we see a gargoyle devouring a human, another entity here at the Cathedral Notre Dame. Good detail in this photograph here. We see a hand, you know, protruding out of the mouth. See the teeth gnawing on the bone of the arm. I see the eyes in some type of euphoric gaze, almost like he's getting high, or he's becoming intoxicated off of the consumption. So there's a lot of little details here, especially. I really have to emphasize that. I know I just kind of did, but really, I mean, these eyes are really, these really tripping me out here. Just how he looks like in a state of just absolute bliss while consuming this other creature or human. I mean, let's look at this a little bit closer. I don't know if it's supposed to be another gargoyle, or like his child, or if it's a human. I mean, it kind of seems like it's just another gargoyle. And look at the grasp that he has on his feet here, with the claws coming around here. I mean, somebody had to make this. You know, like somebody had to like put some conscious effort into creating this work of art here, this statue, this gargoyle. And gargoyle, as long as we're on the subject of gargoyles, gargoyle is another word for grotesque. So in other words, a gargoyle is a grotesque, and grotesques were put on buildings. This is the official story. Grotesques and or gargoyles were put onto buildings to ward off the enemy, evil spirits and so on. So it's kind of like an ironic statement that you would use something that looks so demonic to actually scare away demonic entities, if that makes any sense. Although I would imagine that theory is up for debate, depending on who you talk to. But that's just a quick little lesson there in etymology of the word. Gargoyle means grotesque. And then here we have a fire here in a tower in, I believe, where was this? See, so it's the United States here, because you got the United States flag. I just wanted to kind of come in cold. I didn't want to do a lot of research. I just wanted to kind of examine these with you, and then you can leave your theories in the comments. I mean, that's how we've always kind of done it for the most part. But I believe this was a World's Fair exposition in Chicago, I want to say, was the fire after, not the one that the cow started, but you know, a different one. So I believe this is Chicago. So let's see. Almost looks like a person falling out of the tower here. And these people are standing by. I mean, because if these people look like this, almost like little stick figures, like little sketches of people, and this guy kind of looks like a little sketch, and then he would be even more obscured because he'd be closer to the smoke and a little bit further away from the... Huh. See, I didn't notice this when I found this. Huh. You guys think that's a person? If you guys think that that's a person, leave in the comments if you think this might actually be a human, or if it's just a trick with the smoke, like the smoke coming off just happens. I think it looks like a person, personally. But anyway, then you got the horse and buggies, aka the construction equipment, and the things that hauled all the heavy granite and stone and marble. You know. And some more onlookers here. I mean, it seems to be like a dire situation. So that's another reason why I think this might be a person up here, because these, just the kind of general vibe of the photo, it just seems like there's people's lives in danger, not just the structure. But regardless, you know, interesting image. Never seen it before. And that's one of the things I want to do, you know, just as long as we're on the subject with this channel, is I really do try to find, you know, more obscure photographs, and I do go through some lengths to find, you know, photos that haven't been shown before. Not that there's anything wrong with going over the classics or ones of particular interest, but I do try to keep things a little bit, you know, fresh, we'll say. Fresh with the old, you know, even older or even more obscure sources. So, moving on. And then here we have the interior of the I forget now, the Les Galeries, Les Galeries, something like that, in Paris, France. And this was finished in, I believe, 1906. And this was during the, this is still there. You guys can look it up. I believe it's called the Les Galeries, something like that. Maybe I'll leave links in the description, maybe not. And yeah, you just see this grand, I guess it's technically a mall. It's considered it's a shopping mall now. I think it was then too. So it's a bunch of different shops, a bunch of, nice stuff, luxury, high-end, designer kind of stuff. Like a department store, basically. Like a department store, like a gallery. And here in the United States, we do, there's some malls that are called galleries. In San Francisco, there's the Stonestown Galleria. So it's like that, it's like a mall, basically. But you see the old world construction, and I think it's a repurposed, energy station or palace or an old, and they say, oh, it was built, but we know what's going on. And I was thinking about that kind of stuff recently, the whole, well, it was built then and, it's not old. Let's entertain that just for a second, just in case, for certain buildings and so forth. Let's entertain that for a second, but I can come up with a theory, is that they were going off of at least the ruins of the old buildings, or they were going off of the designs. In other words, they were able to find examples and then kind of reverse engineer it, because the concept or the idea that all of these buildings were built all over the realm at the same time by different cultures, I've always found very interesting. And you find that with other structures like pyramids, step pyramids, temples, stargates, all kinds of stuff all over the realm at the same time, supposedly the same time, and supposedly different people, but we know what is also a possibility. So with that said, that's just a little theory that I have. If you disagree or agree, leave it in the comments. So the other thing that I want to address is I uploaded this photo to Instagram and to YouTube in a short, and then I was just informed just before I started making this video that this is actually from a 1963 issue of Vogue magazine. Okay, and the reason I still included it, and the reason I'm not going to take it down off the Instagram or anything like that, is because it's still a portent to the future. In other words, it's still a glimpse into what could become a reality. So this was predicted in 1963. It was part of an article about what they thought the future would look like in 1963. Now, from where I'm standing in 2022, I wouldn't see this as too far off, especially with, certain things, and then just people always wanting to have different vehicles, different kind of non-mass transportation vehicles, personal transportation, I guess you call it. Very personal, very individual personal transportation. So it looks very old world in the sense that in the 1800s we did have kind of goofy kind of contraptions like this or ideas like this. So but to me, if this came out tomorrow, if somebody said, hey, who wants to buy a big bubble that you can walk around in and you can see everything and you can hear everything, but you don't have to touch anybody, nobody has to touch you, and you're like in your personal little safe space, I think it would sell. I think it would absolutely sell. I think it would sell out immediately. I don't think that they would be able to keep up with the demand for such a thing. And then the other thing, the other reason that I wanted to keep it in the video is because you also see a juxtaposition between the old world and the new world. In other words, back here, you have the old world kind of poking out here in the background and then in this bridge and everything like that. And then you have the new world here. And I like the bending of the light here, how it curves around the glass here, or the plastic or plexiglass or acrylic or whatever they use to. I guess it wouldn't be glass, that'd be pretty stupid, because it would get scratched up and there's a chance it could break and hurt somebody. So it's probably some type of space age polymer, like I don't know, like acrylic maybe. Well, at least that's what they would do nowadays. Maybe it could have been glass in 1963 if it was thick, and how do you get in, how do you get out, and all that stuff. I'm sure they figured it out. So that's why I kept it, because to me 1963 is long enough for it to be kind of a prediction. And I know that we don't necessarily have these yet, but do not be surprised if in the very near future you see something like this pop up. Wouldn't surprise me in the least. So moving on. So here we have the Moulin Rouge, like the movie Moulin Rouge. I say it right? Moulin Rouge. This is the real Moulin Rouge. in Paris. And yeah, they had a real elephant. This is a real elephant. You know, some people might say that it looks fake or something, but that's just because that's what a real elephant looks like when he's standing in a room. You ever hear that expression, you know, the big elephant in the room? Well, that's what it looks like when there's a big elephant in the room. I know it doesn't look right. It looks a little too big, a little too crazy, but I'm telling you, that's what I heard. That's a real elephant. Now, I could be wrong. I'm just going off the information, you know. I mean, who knows? Maybe I'm totally falling for it, but that's what I heard. I know, it's crazy. I know. But and the other thing you got going on here is you got the inheritors, you know, yucking it up, rubbing elbows, you know, trading recipes. And I think it's some people back here doing a little song and dance. You know, that's cute. But yeah, just another one of those, you know, really interesting images. You got the top hats and all that, you know, and they're networking. This guy's being polite, tipping his hat to somebody, tipping his hat to the back of this guy's neck, just in case he's got eyes in the back of his head or anything like that. So that's it with that. You know, if you guys want to examine this more, you can obviously pause it, see it. But you know, it's pretty wholesome, pretty innocent, other than the giant elephant, you know. But anyways, moving on. So here's another gargoyle, or another, you know, grotesque, looking over Paris. This is a pretty famous shot. This has been in, like, movies and stuff, you know. It's a powerful image, you know. And then we have to really, and, you know, maybe I'll discuss that in a later video, but we do have to eventually address or talk about the nature of these gargoyles and how they relate to the buildings. There's got to be some connection there, absolutely. I'd be very shocked if there wasn't already some theories about what these guys represent beyond what I said earlier in the video about, you know, warding off spirits and protecting the building and all that. But see, now that I think about it, another thing that I heard about gargoyles was that, yeah, they were there to protect the building, but I also heard that those were put there to protect the building from the building owner's enemies. In other words, like competition from other business magnates, you know, other high-end, you know, kind of guys. And so they're always battling. They're always in constant competition. These fat cat cutting guys, these captains of industry is another term. So that's what I heard too, is that the gargoyles were there to protect them from their enemies. You know, so there's that. And then there's some other tidbits in this photo. You know, here we see another big, grand archway, totally ridiculous, totally, you know, oversized. And then we see the empty streets. You know, it probably could have been taken early in the morning. We do see probably some signs of life over here. These lights here could, you know, represent people. There might be a guy rocking there. So it's probably early in the morning, something like that. And then, but yeah, just, you know, another one of those really powerful images. So moving on. And then this, I believe, is, where is this? Just kind of going off the top of my head here. I believe this is also in Paris. And if it's not Paris, then it's London. And it's the River Thames. But I know a lot of the photos I grabbed were from Paris, so it could be Paris. If anybody knows, let me know in the comment section of this video. But we see some Antiquitech here. It's a little strange here how it kind of jots off in this direction. But nonetheless, you know, obviously some type of energy receiver and possibly transmitter at some point. And then we see this barge. The barge doesn't have an antenna. Okay. And then we see this guy stand here. And I just like the poignancy in some of these photos. You know, you can just kind of get the sense of what the person might be contemplating. You know, and I like the artistic quality of some of these photos as well. You know, they're composed well. And, you know, I used to be a photographer, so I do have a little bit of appreciation. I mean, I guess I still am a photographer, but you know what I mean. I used to care about photography more. Speaking of photography, here's a good photo. So, what I particularly like about this photo is this man here, you know, with his little hat, this little thing is, some people would say, oh, he's an inheritor. Well, I don't know. See, that's the thing. For the first time in doing these videos and talking about inheritors and talking about all that kind of stuff, I don't really get that vibe off of this dude. And I could be wrong. Obviously, I have no way to, discern for sure who this guy is or what he's all about. But there's just something about him. I'm just getting a read off of it. And he just doesn't give me that vibe. Like, he gives me the vibe like he knows more than the average person. Like, he could be a fool. He could be a complete dullard inheritor. But regardless, there's something telling me that this guy's a little bit different. His hat doesn't seem so kiddish. It doesn't seem like it's so new. He's an older guy. He just seems like and even if he is an inheritor, he's like an inheritor that figured things out. And he's living like a simple life now, just selling sundries here on the promenade. And then you got this thing in the background. And there's something about this particular photograph, the way that it was captured and the way that it was developed at the time or something. It's like more matte. It's like more washed out here. And this is nice and sharp and high contrast. And then this is low contrast. And it's almost like it looks kind of phony. Like it almost looks like a mirage. I'm not saying that it is necessarily. I'm just saying that the final product of this photograph, it gives off that vibe that it's like like it was added in, like it was airbrushed in. It's like a fantasy. Like it looks fake. It looks like it's in the clouds or something. And yeah, and he's got his, he's got his shawl. He's got his mantle here. He's got some funny little shoes. See, that's the other thing that kind of got me, about this dude is his shoes. His shoes seem very like old world shoes. Like either he's older than we think, like he could be like 200 years old or something, he's just hiding out, or those shoes were given to him, they survived a reset or two, but they seem very like kind of like magical boots, kind of thing going on, or magical clogs, But regardless, just a very interesting photograph, and I just wanted to include it in this video because it shows a little bit more human side to this thing instead of just focusing on the buildings. And I think that that's another thing that we should probably look into more going forward is the people of this, of this old world, new world, reset, hypothesis that we're currently experiencing right now in real time, and that's and that's great that we can do that everything seems fresh and exciting again. So here's the Louvre, the pyramid. I'm sure you guys have all seen this in various, representations in film and photographs. But this is, I think this is when it was supposedly relatively new. And they say the Arc de Triomphe, or however you say it. And there's just a lot of old world stuff going on in here. Paris is another gold mine as far as old world. It's very fascinating. Paris, the city of Paris, very fascinating history. Tartaria and mud floods and all that stuff aside, it's a very, and what's happening to it now is a travesty, but that's a whole other video. And I had family, from France and all that stuff, and I once had, delusions or fantasies of visiting Paris and visiting France, but not nowadays. I wouldn't want to be in Europe these days, at least not as a foreigner, not as an American, Wouldn't want to get stuck over there. And so anyways, we see people sitting around, and the other reason I include this photograph is it's heavily damaged. In other words, this photograph went through something and it managed to survive, so this is just another way for it to live on. This is another archive of it. And the reason I know it's damaged is because the uneven border around the edges here, these little spots here. Oh, can't zoom in now. Oh, there it goes. Sorry about that. These little spots here. Okay, so when somebody scanned this, they scanned it in color. They didn't scan it in black and white because obviously you wouldn't have these purples and blues and yellows. So what happened is when this was digitized, it was digitized in color, and it picked up these little specks, and then there was little aberrations in the light or something like that, and it created these little prisms. Down here, is what is more accurately what these damages would have looked like. These little black spots. And then the other interesting thing here is this guy is wearing a t-shirt. So, maybe this photo isn't as old as I think. I don't know if anybody knows in the comments if there's any telltale signs, because to me, it seemed like an old photograph. But now that I'm really looking at it, it might not be that old. Because everybody's dressed more modern, like. Well, that's what I'm saying. They can't all be zingers. There's going to be a few that slip through the cracks. If I'm correct in my assumption that this photograph isn't as old as I think it was. All right. Well, moving on. Okay. Well, here's an old one for sure, right? Same general area. I got the inheritors, top hats and all. And they look exactly like the people in San Francisco. They look exactly like the people in New York, and everywhere else in North America, And that's the other fascinating thing. Because if you look at France, and especially like Paris nowadays, and then you look at like a big city like Cincinnati, or what's another like lesser known big city like St. Louis, Missouri, something like that, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, they don't look the same as people in, say Paris or in Berlin or London. But back then, right after the newest reset, for some reason everybody looked exactly the same. It's strange. I know fashion, blah, 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 all that, whatever. Doesn't make any difference because the result is the same. The end is the same. The sum is the same. The sum is everybody looked the same. There can be explanations, there can be reasonings. Doesn't change the fact. And the fact is what's interesting. Speaking of interesting, here we see just this. Why don't we build like this anymore? I think people would like it. I think people would appreciate it. And it would be a way to, because they don't, because they can't, and they can't because they don't know how, and they don't know how because it's not being shared with them. In other words, you can fake this, but it's pointless. We're too concerned with profit margins, and there's always the fear that it's a waste of time because it's not going to be appreciated. And it's a different culture. It's a different mindset. See, that's what people got to understand is, in the old world, there was different priorities. There was different objectives, and the idea is if you invest in beautiful architecture and you invest in beautiful sculptures and fountains and plazas and things that could be appreciated by the general public, then it would boost confidence and it would spark creativity, and people were more imaginative, and it had a net gain for society to live in a beautiful town and a beautiful aesthetics. Aesthetics being the appreciation and the noticing of beauty. And now we appreciate, or we try to exalt ugliness and greed and so on and so forth. So that's the other big difference with and that it carried on for a little while through the reset as kind of a transitionary period to get people, the people that were left to, acquiesce to the new world. And it's a very gradual, slippery slope kind of thing. But yes, when you go back to the Renaissance and you go back to Europe and you go back to Asia, and here with the Tartarian culture that's been erased, you see an appreciation for beauty. You see an appreciation for sharing a public space. And, the other thing, as long as we're on the subject, as long as I'm like ranting and raving already, is there's no trash. There's no trash, and there was no homeless, and there was no, the crime was so low. Crime usually only occurred at night in certain neighborhoods, and it was a completely different world. And it wasn't even that long ago. You know, we're talking about less than 200 years ago, and it was a completely different world. So that's why I lend credence to the reset theory. It's like something had to like just all of a sudden, you know, it was like, okay, now there's this new program, and we're going to tell people to be criminals, and we're going to encourage depravity and the whole 9 yards. Okay, this photograph I believe was taken in Edinburgh, Scotland, in the late 1800s. And the reason I included it was because, once again, I just find the human element in some of these old photographs very interesting. This, you know, man here walking down the street in the muck of the horse poop and the raw sewage that people would throw out their windows and all that kind of stuff, and he's just tromping through it. Like, he looks like he's determined to get somewhere. And then we've got the fog, you know, the famous Scotland fog coming in here. And then we see some dilapidated kind of buildings here, some old shutters and lace curtains. And then, you know, we start to kind of see maybe some remnants of some old world kind of trim here, chimneys. Yeah, and then we got like stovepipes coming out here. Because, you know, lower class people, they didn't get to have chimneys, they got to have stovepipes. You know, the difference being that their wood burning stoves had like a thin sheet metal kind of pipe that would come out, you know, to get rid of the smoke. But they didn't have chimneys. And the reason that they didn't have chimneys is because they didn't have traditional fireplaces that ran off of radium. And, you know, we know all that not all fireplaces burned wood. We know that they had an advanced, well, what we would perceive as an advanced nowadays, as opposed to burning, you know, dead trees, way of heating these grander palaces, not, you know, these kinds of things. This was like probably a, you know, a lower class neighborhood, and then we see this gnarly staircase, this wooden staircase here that's almost at like a 45-degree angle, or so. It's like almost like completely, you know, I mean, just, it's once again a completely different world. People were tougher, people were different, even though they were inheritors and blah 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 and all that. The point is that people had, they were just like, they were made out of iron and leather, you know, and now we're made out of like cream and feathers, if you catch my meaning. So anyways, interesting photo here, interesting example of, you know, if I had to sum up this photograph, I would say determination. Just because this gentleman looks like he's determined to get where he's going. I don't know why. Just like I said, just, you know, just the vibe I get, you know. Oh, and also he looks, you know, like maybe he's like all on his own, you know. So I guess I would say determination through solitude is what this photograph to me what gives off. And then here we have what I would believe to be London, if that's Big Ben there. I don't know, I could be wrong. Could be Paris again. I picked photos for this video that I just found interesting visually, not necessarily trying to break down any specific timeline or history or anything like that, but just photos that I found to be aesthetically pleasing. Because to have an appreciation for history, to have an appreciation for alternative timelines and reset theories and timeline deceptions, it's nice to be able to appreciate what you're looking at visually and say maybe it wasn't all bad, and maybe there was people back then that knew something wasn't right, and they had heard rumors in the night, and they had heard, you know, tales of Tartaria, or they had heard tales of Hyperborea or Atlantis or any of the other lost civilizations. And that's what kind of gives me a comforting thought at night, is perhaps we're not the first. I know we're not the first, but perhaps, you know, we can kind of take some solace in that and say, oh well, there's no way that we're the first to try to figure this out. I mean, there's people that knew that something was off even back then. You know, some people say that the inheritors' minds were wiped and they had no. I don't really buy that. I think that they were forced to go along with the new narrative, just like how kind of, you know, nowadays you kind of see that going on too, with the psychological operations and so on and so forth. So that's the way I look at it. It's not so much that everybody was like dumbed down and didn't know what was going on. It's just that they were kind of just going along with the program, and if they had a different opinion, then it wasn't necessarily allowed to be expressed in the newspapers and stuff like that. Just like pretty much just like nowadays. So I think there was people looking into the history of their realm in the 1800s, absolutely. And there is certain books and manuscripts you can find where people were trying to tell people what was really going on back then too, and it just never stops. It's almost like a tale as old as time. And here we have another photograph from India, and this is the juggernaut. And the juggernaut, a lot of people don't realize this, that juggernaut is derived from Sanskrit, and it means literally and I could be butchering this translation a little bit, but basically it means what is it? It's the Lord of the Worlds. Lord of the Worlds, something like that. And these carts were made out of wood. Okay, supposedly. And they almost seem like they're slatted. Like it's not even one solid piece. It's just very baffling because from the information that I could get, these little mini temples here, these little shrines that were manifestations of the gods, supposedly. Like they were there to carry the spirit of the various Hindu gods, weighed tons, like dozens of tons. Like this is solid stone. And these carts, these juggernauts, and it's where we get the word juggernaut, carried them. I don't know. I'm still trying to find more information about exactly how that worked. And I guess they're still in existence. In other words, they're still operational in South India. But yeah, I just, it's amazing. I mean, it truly is. Like, I have no idea how they even got this thing on the cart. If they built it while it was on the cart, I really don't understand. I mean, I'm sure some of you have some explanations for it, but the wheels, the axles, just the whole mechanics of it. See, they got it like propped up here with this rock, I guess, so in case it doesn't move on its own. I mean, it's really astounding how something could handle that much weight. I mean, and then to push it, and I heard they were pulled by elephants, and then I heard that it took like 50 people to pull, 100, something like that, 50 to 100 different humans to pull these things, or elephants. Really interesting. If anybody knows, or if anybody has any more information about these juggernauts, these Indian juggernauts, let me know. Very interesting stuff. And then here's also India, unknown location. It was like a buried temple, like a forgotten temple, built into the side of the mountain here. So that's obviously, mud flood, obviously runs through my mind immediately, or melted building, or flood of a different nature, but something that would destroy, something that would cause erosion here to the outer face of this, the entrance here, I guess you call it. So then it really begs the question, was this buried? Or was it more of an entrance to the inside of the mountain? And then that could have gotten covered up as well? I mean, there's just so many questions with a photo like this. Like, this is obviously not the entirety of the construction. So the question is it an entrance to a cave? Or is it the top of something that got buried? Because we can see that there's earth here. I mean, it's just, it's something else here. Because there's no way that this is all there is. Like, nobody's going to put this much effort just to build this little, whatever it is. Instinct or intuition is telling me that it led into some type of subterranean thing, or at least it went further into the side of the mountain, and then there was various hallways and vaults and stuff like that. Maybe a catacomb, a burial, site, something like that. That's just what I'm getting off of it. Like I said, if anybody's got more information, let me know. I always like to utilize the comment section as a kind of open discussion. If YouTube deletes your comment, I'm sorry, but I don't delete comments, but sometimes YouTube does automatically, depending on the language that you use, or if you include any personal information, even an email, or an address, stuff like that, they'll delete it for privacy concerns, I suppose. Okay, Next image. So this one, very interesting here, because, let's see what the address is here. If anybody wants to look that up, there's some writing here too. I'm not exactly sure where this little drawing is, but see, that I know it's a drawing, but to me it seems like a very accurate. It's like it's a drawing, but I don't think that I don't think there's anything like fake about it. In other words, I think it's a very realistic drawing. I think it's somebody trying to draw as close as they could to what would be the equivalent to a photograph. I see no evidence of anything like fantastical. And what's highlighted here, I didn't highlight this, by the way, this is the way I found it, is this Antiquitech here. I mean, this is a really good example of Antiquitech. Like, I've never even necessarily seen something this elaborate as far as transmission. It's not here to catch birds or this isn't a net. This is clearly wires. They're clearly trying to harness the energy of the ionosphere, or from lightning, or from just the air, possibly the micro particulates, the microorganisms in the air. If there's a way to harness the energy off of that, or frequencies, maybe they're transmitting from another tower, they're bouncing things around like a primitive microwave frequencies, or primitive frequency modulations, or amplitude modulations, FM, AM type of thing. And then we see something coming out of the chimney here, another apparatus, some more apparatuses here. So that's why I included it here in the video, is because to me it just seems like a very interesting piece of Antiquitech here. And then even the original person here put this highlight around it, put this box around it to exemplify what's going on here. And they got a couple guys messing with it here, and then obviously we have this whole tower situation going on here. So yeah, very interesting. If anybody knows more about this photograph, let me know in the comments. And then here we have the Watch Palace from the World's Fair in San Francisco in I guess, when did they have the fair? In 1916, I believe. So I guess that's supposed to be a 6 or a 5. Was it 15 or 16? Sometimes I forget. I guess it was 15 actually, wasn't it? Yeah. So 1915. And once again, I just included it because, I have a sense of humor. I'm not like a ridiculous person who doesn't have a sense of humor. And I can see that this was clearly built for the fair. I mean, we can't argue that. I mean, this is Uncle Sam. It looks like cheap construction. And I think that this is sometimes what people think about when they think about the World's Fair being made cheaply and temporary and paper mache and all. It was stuff like this. Like, I'll go along with that. Yeah, it was 1915. It's right here. The Pacific International Exposition, San Francisco. So, I'll go along with that. I mean, that's just, come on. I mean, we can't deny that. This was obviously made specifically. But this kind of construction does not match the kind of construction of the grander buildings and things. Like, this is cheap. It looks cheap. It looks very disposable. And it's silly. It's a novelty. I mean, look at these Uncle Sams and the giant watches. This is like for kids, this is like for the plebes, But there's some other things left over from the World's Fair that were definitely not temporary, and they were definitely not constructed in the same way or even the same time. And that's just, I'm not going to go so far as to say that's a fact, but it's like night and day. So the other reason why I included this in this video is to show, yes, there is aspects of the World's Fair story that don't exactly jive with Tartaria, but there's plenty that does. But this is an example of novelty. So when somebody's saying, oh yeah, like the World's Fair, yeah, big old Uncle Sam, made out of paper mache, yeah there was, and that just shows another level of the absurdity of the whole thing. I mean, the whole thing was like a giant hallucinogenic trip. It was like a big, it was meant to cause confusion. It was meant to make people feel like they were in a trance, all that stuff. So this just leads credence to that. It's just saying like, oh yeah, like it was meant to like make you feel like you were on a different planet or something, you know, with these giant caricatures. And you know, it was really nuts for the time too. You know, people weren't used to seeing stuff like this, so keep that in mind as well. Okay, so next image. So then we have this guy here, and he's standing on some Antiquitech as well, and we see the chains. Now, the interesting thing about the chains, with the research that I'm doing, is that they used to use these chains to harness energy. And there's a temple in Tibet. There's a Tibetan monk, you know, Tibetan Buddhist temple, and there's chains similar to these on an apparatus, you know, kind of Antiquitech looking thing. And there's a lightning storm. And this video was taken recently. You can find it online. And the lightning's going off, so there's an energy storm, and then the chains start moving. They start actually lifting up and becoming more straight, like not so droopy, and they actually become like a long solid chain, and they're interacting with the lightning. And like I said, there are videos on the internet. I mean, it's been seen. It's almost, I mean, I would go as far as to say it's a viral video, and you can find it. You can look around for it. I'm sure you'll be able to find it. It's very fascinating. Very fascinating how the lightning was interacting with these chains, and it was deactivated, but I believe at one point it was activated, and I think that that's what's going on here. Somehow, as these, and people say, oh, it's just decorative. I don't know. I don't know anything about that. I can't, saying it's just decorative is going along with the mainstream narrative. That's not what we're here to do. That's a different sandbox. We're here to try to figure out if there was something else going on. So anyways, and then there's also just this, you know, glaring like thing that he's standing up here like this with no harnesses, no safety equipment. You know, he's just, how did he even get up there like that? Like, you know, and we can see how high he is. We can see he's quite high. I mean, this has got to be, I mean, judging by scale of that, and that, I mean, he's got to be over 100 feet up in the air. He's got to be like at least 10 stories up, you know? So that would be like, you know, what, like 120 feet? That's 10 stories? And stories like typically 12 feet. So, I mean, come on. Like, what's really going on here? You know, he's just chilling. Like, this is the only thing here, his little fingies. Like, that's all that's, like, keeping him from, like, sudden and near or certain death. Here. That's it. How did he get down? Who took the picture? How'd they take a picture like this? Is there another one of these things and there's a dude standing on the other one taking a picture of this dude like that? It's silly. You know? I'm not saying it's fake. I'm just saying, like, people were different. That's all. People wouldn't do this now. If people did something like this, it'd be like a big stunt. It'd be like a big deal and shit, you know? Like, pardon my French. So yeah, I mean, you know, whatever. Got kind of worked up on this one because it's absurd. It really is. It's ludicrous. But okay. And then I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe this was hand painted negative. They didn't really have color film, so what they would do is they would paint the negatives or the plates, and then you could get prints like this because you hand painted them. And I should actually correct myself and say that they weren't painting the original negatives, but they were hand painting the prints, or they create a copy of the negative and they would paint that. So, and then as far as the location, I'm not sure. Like I said, I'm kind of going off the cuff here, and so I'm not sure where this is. And that's kind of part of the mystery sometimes, you know, not knowing every little detail and just kind of using your imagination a little bit. But I'm sure somebody knows, and when I find out, I'll be like, oh yeah, like that's right, I forgot that's where it was. But I just thought it was very interesting. I don't think, I mean, it could be Egypt. I don't want to just default to Egypt just because it looks kind of Egyptian. You know, for all I know, it could be Morocco or something. Like, I don't know. You know, it could be Turkey. You know, I'm not exactly sure, to be like perfectly honest with you. I just thought it was interesting, especially the colors, the greens and the pinks and the blue here. You know, there's other photographs I could have used of the same location. I just chose to use this one just because it was kind of different with the colors and everything. But yeah, I mean, the melted / eroded, faces, very, very eerie, I guess would be one way to put it. It just seems very like lost world, old world, like something happened where people felt inclined to not take care of these things. Like these things could have been saved, but instead they were neglected. Now, what that tells me is that there was some type of catastrophe, or there was some type of shift in, reality, like a reset or just a different paradigm, and nobody cared, or nobody was inhabiting the land for a period of time. And that's something we really got to start thinking about more is, why would something that took so much effort just be well, we don't need that anymore? It's strange. Speaking of strange, we have these guys here again. See, I knew I had another photograph of these. So this is the same. In other words, this is the same as that. It's just different angle, and this one's black and white, and all that stuff. So we don't really need to go into it too much because it's basically the same thing. But once again, why would somebody who put so much effort, why would a culture who got over it? Now you can argue that the next culture that came in didn't have an appreciation for it because their culture didn't build it. But then why not knock it all down completely and use the materials for so there's some purpose. Like, hey, I like looking at those. We didn't build them, but they're okay to look at. Then why not take care of them? So that's the kind of scary thing. Is like, did something happen somewhere in human history where there was nobody to take care of things, and then we slowly came back, and then by the time we came back, they were ruined, and we didn't want to. We just kind of, maybe we liked the way that they looked ruined. It reminded us of the past. It reminded us that time goes on. It reminded us of a lot of things, of entropy and so forth. So hard to say, but very interesting and mysterious nonetheless. And here we have, now I do believe this is Egypt. This is the Nile. Not sure though, but some type of ancient aqueduct or bridge or both. Maybe some type of water reserve, like a reservoir type of thing. And also, is it evidence of a flood? These covered up here, these pillars, columns here, and it's very interesting how we go from like a round column to a square support here, and then this is broken off here. But this might have been so that ships could come through here, this passage, and then possibly there used to be, a walkway or some type of drawbridge or some type of way to get across this at some point. But nonetheless, I don't know too much about this photograph, and it's it's zoomed in. It's just the way that the picture was, so I can't really get too much context, so just move on. And here we have a gentleman standing here amongst some ruins. Looks like an old quarry. And historians will tell you that this is where they got all the stones to build the pyramids, and or whatever this is. This might not be Egypt, but that this was a quarry. And yeah, it does look like a quarry. It does look like people have been cutting stones out of here, but I mean, they had to come from somewhere. I don't think anybody's saying that these things fell out of the sky or anything. But, for how long has it been a quarry, and how were they quarrying the rocks? What kind of technology did they have? What kind of techniques did they have? The thing that always tripped me out about stuff like this is there's no way that it was always a desert, because you have to think about caloric intake. Like, you had to feed people, you had to feed the workers, you had to give them a high protein diet, lots of carbohydrates, lots of protein. How were they able to be strong enough and healthy enough to build these things, and just the whole thing. And then also, where are the mistakes? We have these giant monuments, we have these giant megaliths and monoliths and temples, but there's no, like, what happened to the reject? They just got it right the first time. So that's another thing, is there's no evidence that they had any clear way of teaching people how to do this either. Like, there was no trade schools, there was no textbooks. It was just like, you just looked at something and you just knew how to do it. So that shows some type of hyper-intelligence, some type of different way of thinking, some type of different way of harnessing the human potential in the old world. I do believe that. I do believe that thousands and thousands of years ago, eons ago, that humans had more tenacity. In other words, we weren't distracted and we weren't bombarded with stress and things. Like, we could actually focus on the task at hand. And then there was some divine presence, like we were closer to God, we were closer to the spiritual essence of existence, and it allowed us to complete tasks and take on arduous journeys and all kinds of things. People were just genuinely just tougher and more resilient. That whole life expectancy thing is a myth to make us feel like we're a more privileged society. That the fact is, people lived just as long. There was plenty of 60-year-olds and 70-year-olds. That whole, oh, you die when you're, that's not true. It's just, sorry, that's just the way it is. And there's a lot of evidence to back up what I'm saying, that people did live for close to 100 years, thousands of years ago. That's just the way it is. If you died young, it was probably from a fight. That was probably the most likely way to get killed, was a fight. Or, obviously like a war, a battle, something like that. A wound. A mortal wound. That was the most common way to die. And here we have the mysterious woman. She could be a widow. She could be a witch. She could be a sorceress. She could be a demon. Hard to say. The reason I don't think that she's a widow, per se, is this hand here. It seems very relaxed for a widow. In other words, if she was a widow, she might have a more somber appearance. And then the other thing that I found interesting about this photograph is what's in her other hand and how she's holding it. It's like a wand. And she's holding it ever so daintily, just ever so lightly. And it's got this little crook here at the end. And if you don't know about the symbology about crooks and things like that, there's a whole theory about why certain wands and canes had that little crook and what a crook means and all that stuff. I don't really have time to go into it, and I might mess it up and everything, but I know there's something sinister about these little hoops, but that's a whole other story. But yeah, she's holding it just ever so lightly, almost like it's just like floating there out of her hand. Like, I don't know what that is, because obviously it's too short to be a cane. It doesn't appear to be a pipe or any kind of like real device. It's just like a stick with a little hook, with a little crook there, holding it. I don't know. Very interesting. And then her headdress or her veil or her hood or whatever you want to call it is very interesting too, because it's so tall. Like, if we look at the relation to her hand, like we see how small her hand is. Although she does have quite long fingers, but they're not fat. Like, it seems like a very lean, possibly even emaciated hand here. And then these long fingers, no face, obviously, all black. And then she's standing in what appears to be, it could be like a stage, it could be a set, or it could be like a legit like stone. It's hard to say. It's obviously a stage photo. It's obviously like a studio photograph. But as to the authenticity of this material here, but regardless, very, very interesting. If anybody knows more about that, let me know. And I do believe that is the end of the slideshow here. We've been going for basically an hour, so it's a little bit on the longer side. So I hope you made it this far, and I'm going to be trying to do more videos on a more regular basis. Just got a lot of irons in the fire, and I want to start doing live streams on a regular basis, on a scheduled basis, at least once a week. And I've been doing live streams on the Telegram, and if you're not in the Telegram, you can find the link in the description, and you can find links to all my other platforms on my Instagram at MudFloodMemes or at Old Scary World, same account. So once again, thank you for watching. Goodbye.